you go. All right, take it away.
Hi everyone. So I am a first year PhD student working at Edinburgh University, and my colour is looking at how we can use. My project is looking at how we can use colour and shape to contextualise and communicate musical harmony. So my background is primarily in composition, and then I dabbled a bit in sound design, and then I went into more physical computing side of things. So my PhD project has grown from my final degree master's project. So this is Blox. So Blox is a system that seeks to enable young children to learn about musical harmony through play. How it works is that there's a series of different coloured blocks, and when they're stacked on top of each other, that then creates different harmonies. You'll see in the pictures we have a little base pad, and then you build up from there. So let's see. Apologies for the bad quality video. So you'll place the initial block, which then creates your bass note. And then we've placed a primary colour, which adds a fifth. And then a secondary colour, which adds a third. And then a tertiary colour, which adds a second. So the really important thing about this project is it's not necessarily connecting specific intervals to specific colours. It's connecting the type of interval to the type of colour, i.e. our primary colours, secondary colours and tertiary colours. It was embracing Montessori pedagogy, if you're familiar with that, basically learning through play and experimentation. This system is quite temperamental. It was working off resistors, so we could only stack a certain amount of blocks before the system couldn't read the difference anymore. So part of my current research is looking at how we can build a more stable system. So the research that went into this, I worked with two separate groups of participants, and I really wanted to understand how a group of trained musicians or people with a certain level of musical experience, how they reacted to the questions compared to children with very, very limited musical experience. So within Group A, there was a whole range of people who'd learned music through high school or who were professional musicians or those studying at conservatoires. And Group B was school pupils at Holland Park Primary School that I was currently working at the time. And they had very limited, if absolutely no, musical experience. And I sent out a range of surveys to see how they would interact with connecting these colour relationships to intervals. So within the surveys, they were asked a range of questions. Each question would have a musical excerpt, and then they got to connect the colours to the two different pitches they heard in that excerpt. So they would have an octave, a perfect fifth, major third, major second, and minor second. So with each of the recording, they chose a colour to start with, and then they heard the recording, and then they chose a corresponding colour for that second note. So here we have our colour wheel. The challenge with these surveys was translating the results into numerical data that I could then analyse. So if, say, the participant chose blue as their primary colour, if they decided that the second note was also blue, that just translates as 1, which will make sense in the next slide. But then if they chose blue-green, the numerical data would be a 2, green numerical data would be a 3. Nod if you're following me. Does that make sense? Yeah. So these are the results from Group A. As you can see from our octaves and perfect fifths, the results are more varied depending on how close the colours are or how far away they are. But then if we look down to our major seconds and our minor seconds, the majority of participants are saying that it's either the same colour, the colour next door. So they're really drawing on that really similar visual relationship between the colour and the sonic one. within our primary school children, although it's not as clear, you still have a similar trend in that within our larger intervals, the differences in colour are more mixed. And then within our smaller intervals, they do kind of gravitate towards much closer colour relationships. So I was thinking if I were to do this again, I would want to explore directionality. Within most of the results, they started at the top and worked their way around the circle clockwise, which I guess corresponded to the fact that they always heard the interval ascending, and it would be interesting to see if that had a natural correlation, and if the interval was played descending, would they go round in the other direction? Also hue, all the colours used had the same brightness quality, so then I think there is room to expand in, does hues of different brightness levels correspond to different octave positionings, i.e. lower could be darker, higher could be brighter. So within the development, I've been looking into colour theorists, especially those working in the 20th centuries. So whether you've heard of Albers or Itten, so they discuss the impact that colours have on each other, that push and pull, similarly to what happens within a piece of music with our chords, intervals push and pull notes in different directions. But the really interesting thing about colour is we never see a colour in isolation, we always see a colour within its context, and the context can then change how we see it. So our perception is completely relational, we do not see colours as an absolute, we see them in their surroundings. So then, if we use all of our colours in the colour wheel, all of the same hue quality, the wavelength approximately between violet and red equates to the wavelength of our octave. So our colour wheel divides into 12, our octave divides into 12. We can assign the separation of colour to the separation of our chromatic progression. That isn't to say that I'm assigning C to violet, it's just using that pattern and using the colours to correspond to that progression. So I've taken that idea and created some intervals for you to see. So at the top we have our semitone, our tone, our minor third, major third. And then in the middle we have our basic chords, major and minor, and then sus2, sus4. And at the bottom we have our tetrachords, dominant seventh, major seventh, minor seventh, diminished seventh. So although in music different keys can have different qualities, notes can still play the same role. So a dominant, even though it might be a different pitch, is still playing the same role as a dominant. So that can translate as colours not connected to keys, they're connected to these, or colours not connected to pitches, they're connected to these pitch relationships. So within my research, there was a lot of discussion about impressionism and something called an optical mixture. So an optical mixture is when we have multiple colours, not blended, but created and layered next to each other. And the technique also almost blends them, and it makes them invisible and creating a new colour. So in my head, this works quite well with chords. A chord is a blending of different notes to create a new sound. And if you take away any note in that chord, it changes the sound. So here I was experimenting with how can we view chords using the system that I developed with the different colour relationships. So does a note take priority over another in a chord? My answer would be no, because they meld together to create a new sound. So here was just some experimentations of how we could possibly view optical mixtures of our commonly used chords. So the next steps in this project, I'd quite like to work on translating pieces of music using the system to see how they look and see how they can interact, but then also creating a system where a user can play something on the piano and see those intervals and colour relationships through the use of, say, a max patch. I think that's it. Anyone got any questions?
Questions?
first.
Hi, this is an awesome idea. I was wondering if you have worked with anyone who's synesthetic. Yeah, because we have very strong opinions about which colors are associated with which pitches.
Yeah, so this was the argument that I gave in my master's exam. I'm not assigning a color to a pitch because I know that I have friends who have synesthesia and they see D major as pink, etc. It's purely using colors to communicate the in-between space of intervals. So it's communicating the distance and nothing is assigned. So you could be playing in C major, you could be playing in F major, but the color relationships that would represent the tonal relationships would be there.
But I think some of us, particularly those with perfect pitch, it has nothing to do with the intervallic relationship. It's just about the absolute pitch.
Yeah.
And so creating like color relationships between intervals between those like would not map to, or would maybe be very different from the data that you might get along these other types of scales. So it might be good to kind of include that in the survey if you haven't already, and then segment your data set so that you can keep the synesthetic
that
people.
would be a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you could argue the same if I was trying to do the same with people who have color blindness.
Exactly. That was going to be another question.
So you'd end up making so many exceptions that you wouldn't be able to develop a system out of it. I'm very jealous. I wish I had synesthesia. I think it would make everything far more interesting. But yeah, I think it's just a development of a system that could be used for people with neurodiversities. So I'm dyslexic, and this helps me understand what I'm doing. So I colour in all of my piano sheet music is coloured in different colours to help me see the spaces. So I think it's just creating a system that can assist a certain type of person rather than be facilitated for everyone. Yeah.
Okay, questions? Did you have one, right?
I just want to, your chords, they're brilliant.
The optical mixtures, or just
the squares. They were just, yeah. It just made a lot of sense.
Cool.
It was really
I'm
cool.
glad.
That was it.
You're the first people to see it. It's just been me and my tutor who've been discussing it, so it's great.
I was just like, wow. Yeah, that was very cool.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Francis? I have one, if you don't mind. So I definitely had this same kind of thought about this synesthesia for a second, but I understand it's a little bit of it's almost like another representation or kind of a metaphor for these distances, which I find is really fascinating. Have you considered any other kinds of modalities, or maybe even in your own practice? It sounds like it's helpful to, I guess, navigate dyslexia using these associations. Have you thought about any other kinds of associations for these pitch distances?
I mean, I think there could be possibilities for a range of applications, especially within education. And I think I would be interested to see how the connection with the visual and the sonic could then apply to other subjects. So, for instance, mathematics, could it be used to represent certain mathematical distances by adding in that sonic element? I think, yeah, I don't know if that completely answers your question. But
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting too, because we have these kind of like color mappings and things exist in a way that we already kind of perceive. So it's interesting too to see that it was, even for the primary school children, it was like that. It's amazing. Does anybody have any other questions? Oh, yeah.
I was wondering if you have collaborated with any instrumentalists and had them practice the system so that they could play chords just by looking at the colors, if that's something that you can kind of learn easily and do.
I haven't gotten that far, but that's something that I would like to have a go on. I'd quite like to develop it using, say, Max MSP, plugging in a keyboard and having a go at having reactions. I have had users work with the Blox. Unfortunately, I couldn't show the videos because they were 5 and child protection. But yeah, I definitely like, that's kind of the next stage of the project of all of this has kind of been in my own head and the connections that I've made, and it would be then testing that out and seeing how other people react with it. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you again, Francis. Okay. So next.